Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for today's webinar, How to Ace an Interview, part of Michigan Online's Learn for Your Future campaign. My name is Eric Joyce and I'm the lead marketing specialist at the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation. I'm excited to be your MC for the day. Our Learn for Your Future campaign encourages you to explore our portfolio of free resources and open online courses on Michigan Online designed to help you to start or advance your career. You'll learn how to craft a resume, interview tips, the steps to a successful negotiation, how to improve your communication skills and emotional intelligence, or even how you can introspectively find purpose and meaning in your life. You do not need to be a University of Michigan student to engage in these short online learning experiences. So after today's event, please visit online.umich.edu/learnforyourfuture to start exploring. So before we get started, I'd like to share just a few housekeeping items. Today, we invite you to submit your questions to our panelists in the Q&A section, and they'll do their best to answer as many of your questions as they can. Given our limited time this afternoon, we ask that you keep your questions related to the topic, and please do feel free to upvote any questions you'd also like to have answered. If you haven't already in the chat, please share where you're from. We always love to see kind of where everyone is joining us in our conversations. And as a final reminder, today's event will be recorded. So please, and we will make sure it's available on Michigan Online later. Today, I'm joined by Maurice Washington, Director of the University of Michigan Athletics Career Center, as well as Julie Fielding, Assistant Director of the University of Michigan Athletics Career Center. Welcome, Maurice and Julie. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this and very, very important part of landing the job that you want in your life, right? So if you think about all the elements of an interview or elements of job search, I would argue that this is probably the most important because this is the first step or one of the first steps. And so it's important to prepare for this. It's important to have the confidence in doing well, understanding your value that you bring to a company. We always tell our student athletes that when you're doing an interview, you already qualify for the job. The employer is trying to see if you are a good fit, or if you would be a good fit for the organization.
Yeah, so if you got to this point, you spent time crafting your cover letter, you've spent time editing and tailoring your resume to those jobs that you're applying to. But now they want to hear you talk about it, right? The interview, like Maurice just said, if you get the interview, they know you can do the job, but now it's your turn and your chance to really articulate what they've seen in your resume and your cover letter and your application, and it's your chance to tell your story. So Maurice and I are just going to walk through different steps of the interview, interviewing, talking about questions that you should be maybe thinking about or preparing to answer. And then, like Eric said, then we'll open it up and open the floor up to questions that you have.
When thinking about interviewing, you got to think about the different components of an interview. You got the opening portion of an interview. You have a report where they're going to ask questions. There's some agenda setting. There's definitely some research in the interview. Again, it's all about preparation. And it's all about the interpersonal, as I mentioned before, the interpersonal that fit into the organization. So how you are projecting and how you are representing yourself, you want to make sure it's aligned to the organization that you're applying for, right? And so, Julie, when we're talking to our student athletes about interviewing, what do you think will be the first step, right? So I have my cover letter, right? I submitted my resume. I get that call or that email saying that, hey, you have an interview scheduled. What would you think is the first step?
Yeah, let's use the chat function and put in the guesses for the first step in acing that interview. What would you do first?
Mary had a great response. Research the organization. Absolutely, researching the organization. Along with that, research the organization is really, really paying attention to the job description, right? The job announcement, understanding, again, aligning your skills and your experiences to what the company is asking for. and really thinking about how they align.
Yeah, I'm a big visual person. And so, what I suggest to do is print out that job description and highlight it, read through it and highlight everything. Okay, I'm going to highlight everything I've done or highlight the skills I know I have or the qualifications or job responsibilities, highlight that. And then when you see that paper highlighted, that just boosts like, oh, wow, I do have what they're looking for. I have done this before. And so you can visually see that, right? And it's helping you to start preparing to develop answers that are going to be tailored and specialized to the position that they're looking to fill. And what else that helps you do is to identify, those questions maybe, oh, I don't have the skill that they're looking for yet, or I haven't learned this technical software. And so you're able to put yourself in the mindset to say, okay, if I don't know how to do something, what do I do? Or how do I answer that? And so you're able to put into play, your ability to think on your feet and learn quickly. And before I get this job, Maurice, I'm going to spend time into, looking at YouTube or Coursera or LinkedIn Learning to get up to snuff to the best of my ability before I start onboarding, right? So it really identifies not only the what you're highlighting and what you do have, but you're able to be prepared for maybe what you're not, maybe what you haven't prepared or haven't had yet. And so you're able to answer that question too.
Another important thing is to identify the type of interview that you're going to participate in, right? The majority of interviews are behavioral. So they're going to ask you questions about tell me a time when. So you're going to be telling a story. Depending on the industry, if you're engineering, maybe it's a practical interview, right? They're going to have you do some type of task. Some interviews, definitely in higher education, they want you to do a presentation. So asking all of those questions of the type of, what are the expectations of the interview so you can properly prepare? Because again, it depends on where you're going to work. They may ask something of you and you don't want to walk into or prepare for an interview and you're just ready for some questions and they give you a task and you're not prepared to satisfy that task.
Yeah, and the interview starts at that point, right, Maurice? Like even before those questions start getting fired off at you, they're looking at and kind of picking apart your correspondence to them. Wow, Maurice asked me 5 questions. His attention to detail is high, right? Or he's thorough in making sure that he understands what's asked of him. Or he's been very friendly during this whole process and really maybe I'm the admin assistant and he's made me feel really part of this process. And that's somebody who I'd want to add to the team. So making sure you understand that the interview doesn't just necessarily start when the questions start getting fired off at you. It starts with that initial piece of correspondence, whether that's a recruiter, admin assistant, hiring manager. So everybody is really interviewing you in that process. And then just adding a little bit more on the research piece, leveraging online resources and making sure you not only are prepared to talk about the position that you're applying for, but also the company. And so let's use the chat. When you're preparing for an interview, how long do you tend to pour into the interview process? How long do you research or prepare for an interview that's coming up? Maurice, what would you say? How long do you prep?
I go through the whole interview probably 4, 5, 6 times, right? In front of the mirror, right? Because those nonverbal cues mean so much, right? So if you think it's weird speaking or talking to yourself in the mirror, I think we all do it in the mornings anyway, right? When we're doing our hair, our shaving, practice your interview. You'll notice if you turn your hair or if you have those nonverbals. And that's even to date with virtual. Now we're in a virtual space, right? So the first interview is either going to be a phone interview or a virtual interview, right? Dress the part, right? Go through the process. You see what we have behind us. You probably don't want that in the interview, right? So you don't want, you got to think about the setting of the interview, but definitely practice.
Yeah, we always say fail to plan to fail. And so you always want to come up with a strategy. When you're interviewing, the competition just keeps getting more intense, right? And so you want to do your best part to put the energy and effort you put into applying and in the written marketing materials to do the same when you're interviewing and when you're talking about yourself, right? And so why it's a lot of preparation is not just on the company or just the research of the position, but a lot of the time, we're not used to talking about ourselves in the way that they're asking us to, right? We we're the experts on ourselves, but that's because we know us like the back of our hand. But when someone's asking us, Maurice, tell me about yourself, you have to think about that for a second because it's not something we get asked every day. And so that's when the preparation comes in, and that's really important because you're able to organize your thoughts, right? You know who you are, right? And what you want, else you wouldn't have probably put your name in the hat for that role, whether that's on the department level, the position level, or the organizational level. But you have to kind of brush up on oh, wow, what's my best example or experience in, wow, I haven't talked about myself in a really long time. Or we get a lot of, I'm humble. I don't want to come off as bragging or sounding pompous or conceited. And how do I mirror the two of putting my best foot forward, but not, the perception of she's a know-it-all, he is a know-it-all, and so making sure that you're setting up that plan so you're able to perfectly articulate the message and the story that you want to tell.
So now you've prepared, you've practiced in the mirror, right? You're looking good. You have your best outfit on, whether that, again, that's phone because you look good, you feel good, right? And that carries on through your voice. You're understanding your nonverbals. Now you're at the interview. And the first question that they're always going to ask is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Boy, I tell you. Now, I want you to think of an interview as this. An interview is really a conversation. Those individuals that are interviewing you, I promise, they probably have other jobs, right? And so they're there probably as stressed as you are. So it's a conversation. So the first question, I tell individuals that you take over the interview in 2 times, at the beginning and at the end. We'll get to the end here in a moment, but at the beginning is, tell me a little bit about yourself. Julie, how long do you think that conversation, that response should be?
Yeah, I always say like a minute and a half or 2 minutes, which can seem like a really long time, but it's allowing you to pace yourself, especially if you have 20, 30 years of a career, right? You want to be able to tell your story and you want to set the tone and the pace for the interview. That's the first question. So typically it's the one that you're most nervous about because it's my go to start talking about myself, but it's allowing you to connect with the interviewer to really lay that foundation of, hey, here's who I am, here's what I'm interested in, here's what I can do for you, and this is me just scratching the surface. I always say it's like the equivalent if I, had a book or, a biography on myself, this would be the back page. To tell me about yourself would be that little paragraph or 2 of the back of what's coming in the next 100 pages of this book. And so it's just an intro. It's high level. Here's who I am. Here's, why I'm here. And I always think it's fun to add like a little fun fact or something that, I love animals. And so when I'm not at work or with my family, you can find me at the local animal shelter on Saturdays, volunteering like or something. And that allows oh, she's done, we're moving on to the next, but it also opens the door for, the conversation to, instead of moving vertically, it goes horizontally because maybe Maurice loves dogs and he has a photo of his 7 dogs on his desk or something. And we're talking about that. And it's, what that does too, is it's helping me calm down because we found something that we already have in common. And I already see Maurice as the interviewer as, like he was just saying, it's more of a conversation, not an interrogation. And so you want to try to level the playing field and feel a little bit more comfortable when you're talking, and to tell me about yourself and ending it with, where you spend your time or what you, like to do outside of work or a hobby is allowing them to look at you now more as a human and not just an applicant. And I think that's really important. And it reminds you too that this is a job seekers market right now. So you have a lot of stake and there's equity in this process. It's not, oh, wow, well, the decision is theirs. What if I don't get it? The decision is also yours. If the conversation doesn't go well, or you're not feeling a good, the vibe or a fit, you can also turn that down or say no. And I think the tell me about yourself really, like I said, starts the process of evaluating the company as well as them evaluating you.
Yeah, we said doing a research on a company, but I think it's also important to do the research on those who may be asking you questions. right? And so understanding and knowing and looking at LinkedIn or looking at the company structure and finding the names of the individuals that's going to be interviewing you. And then when you get to that portion of telling a little bit about yourself, maybe there's some commonality. You never know. You went to maybe undergrad together or grad school together. You're from the same town. So that brings that synergy together.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's like, wow, Maurice did the research. He knows who he's talking to. And that just, again, it shows that he put the time and effort into that research. Now, did that have to take too long? No. LinkedIn does a great job of giving us a brief snapshot, in 2 to 5 minutes, which is great. But it shows that he thought that was important in this process and that people are important to him. Maybe he's, a people-oriented person at work. And so maybe that's important to you in the hiring process as well. And it'll give you those things outside of what the response is to those questions.
So now we got past the first question and we calm down. Boy, now we're on to the dreadful questions. And that's what we dread and we worry and we lose sleep. We have no idea what they may ask us, right? So there are thousands and thousands of questions out there. But I'll tell you one thing, they're going to ask you a question. You may know it and you may not know it, right? But again, remember, it's a conversation, right? And if you don't know an answer, right? So I'd say this. Someone asks you a question, tell me a time when, or didn't matter what the question is. Do two things. Repeat the question, right? Repeat the question and think about it. You do not have to fire off a response, right? And I would say repeat the question for two reasons. One, to let them know that you understood what they asked you. Two, it gives you time to think about it, right? Again, if they ask you a question you don't know, and if you don't have an answer, believe me, when we put questions together, people take pride in putting those tough questions together, right? So give them credit. That was a great response. You know what, Julie, that's a great question. I don't have an answer for that right now, but can we come back to it? But you better believe you better shorthand that question, right? You better write that a clip note of that question down and come back to it, right? But you're not going to be marked off, or it's not going to be a mark on your record that you didn't ask right away. And you come back to that question, right? But if you know it, take your time and think about it, right? Think about the entire process. So how are you answering the questions? There's an acronym with there too, SOAR and STAR. I'm sure many of you have heard of SAR. Situation, task, action, result. I like SOAR, situation, obstacle, because it's definitely an obstacle, action, and result. And I want you to practice that. When you're preparing for an interview, think about something you're proud of. Think about something you're not proud of. Think about a difficult decision you made. Think about a project that you had, right, that did not go well. Julie, think about things that don't go well. We all often hear questions about what is something, how we turn something good into something bad, right? Mm-hmm. What is a weakness? Oh boy, that's the question we all get. What is a weakness? What's your response to that? What do you think?
Yeah, the weakness is always one that hangs people up. And I always say, don't think of it as a weakness. Think about it as an area that you're working on improving. And so a lot of the parts of interviews are psychological, right? And so talk about that, something that is an area for improvement or that you're working on, and put that in the beginning, and then talk about how you're improving it and how you're working on it. So as the interviewer, they've already forgotten about, oh wait, what did Maurice even say is his weakness? Now I know how he, from like a project management standpoint, how he works through something, and how, hey, if there's a problem, here's how it's going to be solved. Or, hey, if there's an inefficiency, here's how I'm going to, invest in it and work on it. But I always say, don't talk about it or call it a weakness. It's always, an area for improvement. And, people always tend to run to to Google and say, what's a good answer for the weakness question? And you'll see oh, I'm a perfectionist, or I'm, I take too much on, or, I'm too nice at work, or all these things that come up on Google. As the interviewer, we can read right through what's authentic and genuine and what's not. So don't be afraid to be your authentic self in answering what that actually is. I humbly say that I'm not perfect, and it's important to recognize that, there's all things that all of us are working on, but be authentic with the interviewer and say that it's okay to be vulnerable, but it's also shows that you're confident in saying, hey, Maurice, I'm not great at this, but I'll tell you what, this is something that I'm dedicated and determined to keep improving and working on. And I promise you that because I'm a hard worker, or, my commitment to my job in the organization is really important to me. And so again, making sure that it's an authentic response and not just a canned answer. You can tell typically the difference. And then the interviewer thinks about, well, if she just kind of Googled something or gave me this answer, what else is he or she doing that for in the other responses? So don't be afraid to be a little vulnerable and uncover something, but make sure you're talking about it in a way that obviously isn't detrimental to the position. That's really important as well.
So let's say you are posed with a question and you responded, right? You're a little nervous, you responded, and then the interview process is starting to, progress, and you start thinking, man, I could have answered the last question better, right? Before you answer the new question, right, go back, and just say, I like to rephrase that, or, I misquote, or, I gave a different stat, or, as I thought about your question, right, there's more I want to add to it. Again, these are things that an interviewer is marking down. Oh, he went back, or he or she went back to that, right? You want to, again, when you leave the interview, you know how we always say, man, I wish I would have said that. I wish I'd have done that. You know what? Leave it on the table. Put it all out there, right? This is your time to shine. And it's not you against anyone but yourself, because you only have those experiences. Those are only your experiences that you get to share. You're telling, again, storytelling, you're telling the story. So don't be afraid of going back, right, and taking notes.
And a lot of the time too, we don't really remember everything that the person says, but we definitely know how they made us feel during that, right? And so maybe I didn't answer the questions 100%, but I really connected to the people. They felt my enthusiasm and excitement for the opportunity. And they were like, you know what? She'd be a great fit here because she's willing to ask questions. She's not afraid to ask questions. She's not afraid to admit when she maybe messes up. And that's a person we want to add to our team. And so, like Maurice was saying, the points off for not answering the question right or whatever, that's like the old school mentality of interviewing, right? It really should feel more conversational. And when you're interviewing, fit is really important, right? But we talked about at the beginning, to get the interview, they know you can do the job, but are you that person who's going to fit into the organization and really contribute the skills, the transferable skills that they need to take that company or the department forward?
In your experience, what is like the question that really stumped you, right? That you said, oh my God, I can't believe they asked me that question. I'll tell you, I'll let you think about it, but I'll tell you. I was asked if I could be an animal or an insect or whatever, what would I be? Now, most people are going to say lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my, right? You want to be that big brute thing. And I said I want to be an ant. And the interviewers were like, an ant? Yes, because they carry 4 times their size and they work as a team. Again, so my point is, you have to just think off the cuff. You just got to go with the flow of it, right? Now, so it was humor for them. And I'm like, yeah, a little ant, right? Because ants, they understand their values, right? They understand their roles within the colony. And I end up getting the job. But it was just thinking on my feet. What about you, Julie?
I hate questions like that because I overanalyze everything and I'm like, well, why are they asking me that? What are they trying to uncover? What do they want to know? But it's absolutely what you just said, Maurice. They want to see if you can think on your feet and how are you working through something or how are you thinking through something? So those, like almost case study type questions, like how many M&Ms would fill this room? Things like that. Who knows? But how do you think through that? And did I panic? Did I remain poised? And so those are all things that they're looking for. And those are all things you have control of. They probably don't know the answer to some of those questions and they absolutely don't expect you to, but they want to see, okay, how's Maurice going to walk through this problem and how is he going to think through it? And then that's on you to walk them through that. Okay. So I'm thinking about, okay, what are the dimensions of this room? How big are an M&M? How big is an M&M? And then working and talking through my logic to them is showing them kind of how I would work through a problem for a situation at work. So those are ones that I'm like, I get annoyed by, but that's just because I'm an overanalyzer. But I also like to work through, like from a project management standpoint, from inception to execution. So I like to think through my answers as well. So
Now we're at the end. We're near the end of the, you have run through the gauntlet of all those great questions. You've taken your notes along the way and you're thinking, wow, now this is the second time you get to take control of the interview, the question phase, right? Before I would ask any questions, I would think back to any of the prior questions that were asked to me if I wanted to revisit those questions, or I would just close that portion out of the interview, right? I mean, and I would ask them, did I answer any of your questions, all of your questions successfully, or was I clear on my responses? Now they're going to say, thank you for taking the time to be with us. What questions would you have for us? How many questions do you think, Julie, you should have prepared? I think it kind of ranges.
I would say 3 to 5, 3 to 5 questions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You don't know if they're going to answer a few during the process or when you get there. And so you always, and have those written down if it's in person or virtual, like on your Padfolio. So when you're going to the interview, you have that Padfolio, extra copies of your resume, some names of people you'll be meeting along the way, email addresses for those people too for the follow-up after the interview, but also where your questions are written down. So you can review and refer to those, which is totally fine at the end. Again, just shows that preparation piece and you're able to ask those. Yeah.
If by any chance you made it through the phone interview, the virtual interview, and now it's an in-person interview, during the question phase, I would ask that if there's a panel, let's say there are 3 people on the panel that's asking questions, whoever asks the question, you start and you finish your response with them. But you want to talk to the entire panel. Meaning, so if, again, 3 people or more, or 2 people, you always want to talk to the entire panel, right? But I would definitely start my response. Again, repeat the question. Start my response with you, Julie, right? And I'm going to speak to everyone else. And when I come to a close, I'm going to finish with you. That lets everyone know that you're speaking to them, right? And you don't want to ask questions based off something in a job description because you didn't do the research or didn't review the job description. You can gain some clarification. For example, a good question is training. Most job descriptions don't talk about the training that's involved, right? Or how the environment is. Now I'm seeing more and more as we're looking at different industries and occupations. They're listing job descriptions. They're talking about the environment because that's so important today, right? You may come across a description that doesn't talk about. So that's a great question. What type of environment are you going to be working in, right? Is it a team environment? Are you going to be required to do things as an individual? What does the training structure look like, right? I always ask the question also, the person that's speaking to me, how did they get to where they are? I mean, I kind of know the response, looking at LinkedIn or doing some research, but what were the steps and what were the experiences that they had in order to get to where they are today, right? And that way you'll see if you mesh with the company.
Yeah, I always ask or like to ask about like how that person, the mission of the company or the core values of the company, how that person is carrying those out every day, or, can they recite those or they know those? And so that'll tell you a little bit too. You did the research, but also the culture of the company. And if that's something, when I work someplace, the culture is really important to me. And so I want a place that really is like living by the values that the CEO or the president puts out there. And so if the interviewer can speak to those, you can see that. If the interviewer can speak to those, you can also see, so those are things that are important. Definitely don't want to ask anything that you can just Google, right? Because that just shows you're disinterested. More of like an assertive one, especially if there's a few rounds, is, Maurice, do you have any hesitations about hiring me today? It's kind of like oof, did you go there? But it's like, is there something I didn't say or something I didn't do that gave you a reservation? Tell me now. But like I said, it's a little bit more of an assertive question or approach, but especially if you're going through rounds and rounds, like, let me know if there's something, or let's see what's going on with how I'm being perceived by the interviewer as well. So that's all.
Those are great questions. Again, your questions is you think that although you're the one being interviewed, you're interviewing them as well.
Mhm.
You want to put that in mind for I'm asking questions now, so I'm shifting, the power of this interview session to ask them questions. You really want to get a feel of the organization and what those people think. Another place, Julie, that I have gone is the frequent, every company or every organization has a frequently asked questions area.
Mm-hmm.
I go there, right?
Yeah.
And you will find some great questions there, like, new programs and new departments that were added and why those departments were added. And another question is the mission and vision. You'd be amazed how many people don't know the company's mission and vision, right? And so a question is, I know the company's mission or whatever it is. Ours is service before self-excellence in everything we do. So everyone knows what the MAX mission statement is. But how do we get to that point, right? And do our processes align to what our mission and vision is, right? So those are just some tidbits of some good questions.
And too, now is a big time people are pivoting in their careers, right? Maybe they're leaving industry X to go to Y, and there's that reservation or hesitation of, oof, like I don't have experience in this. That's where your research on LinkedIn and the people you're talking to, you might see, oh, Maurice, he pivoted his career after 20 years from X to Y as well. That's a really good opportunity to talk about that and address that, because inevitably it's going to be something that's in the back of your mind and bothering you or worrying you about, maybe I'm not going to get this interview because I don't have the direct experience. But you're seeing that they've hired people who were just like that before. So getting their take in their experience and advice on that too, I think would provide some comfort, because that is something that can be uneasy about. Well, I'm not qualified. We always think like that. Well, I'm not qualified. I don't have this. And I always tell our student athletes, I don't care what you don't have. We can't change that, but let's talk about what you do have and let's market the hell out of it, right? And so that's something that's really important, is when you're talking about yourself, especially for a job, you're competing for something. And so you're marketing yourself for that thing. There's going to be one winner or one person who gets that job, and why should it be you? Do a good job of telling your story and articulating that. But also it's kind of goes back to that, that not untalked about, but maybe the thing that isn't really talked about. And what's important too, Maurice, is confidence you bring to an interview, and the conviction you have in your voice and your belief in yourself that you can do it. Maurice, talk about that and candidates who've shown confidence in an interview, and maybe some who haven't been as confident in an interview, and what's that looked like and how's that affected the result?
Confidence is the number one key, right? And I think that comes with some practice, right? Again, practicing. We hear practice makes perfect, right? Being able to tell your story. If you are the type of person that really don't do well speaking to people, that have a challenge with speaking to someone, just think that, put in the frame of mind that you already work at the company, and the individual that's asking you questions, they're new. And they're just kind of going around the company asking people what it is they're doing. So you got to put yourself in a mindset that I already work here, right? You got to see yourself as being a part of that conversation, right? And there's nothing wrong with saying at the beginning of the interview, I'm a little nervous, right? And it's okay, because the people asking questions, they've been there too, right? I'm a little nervous, but I'm here, I'm ready, I'm excited to be here, right? And then we also think about confidence. You've done well in an interview. We all just experienced March Madness, right? Just because you think of the interview as rounds, right? You had a great phone interview, doesn't mean you won the job. Every interview, every round of the interview doesn't mean that you won the job until you get to the end, right? So you need to prepare and perform during each round of the interview, right? Now, confidence also means that if you are overly confident, you don't want to be, I think you don't want to be overly confident. You just want to be able to tell your story. You don't want to be kind of cocky with it, right? You want to go in there and just have the bravado that, oh yeah, I don't need to prepare for this and I can just respond. Not at all. I shared an example. There was a young man a student who interviewed at this finance company. And it was a in-person interview, and no, it was a sales position. And so the recruiter asked the young man during the interview, here's my laptop. I want you to sell me this laptop. Sell this laptop to me. And the young man said, you want me to sell you the laptop? He said, I want to see if you can sell me this laptop. So the young man takes the laptop and leaves the interview. He takes the laptop, he leaves the interview, and he goes home. So the recruiter's sitting there thinking, where the heck did this young man, where did he go? 30 minutes go by, right? And now the recruiter's like, this guy just stole my laptop. Where did he go? You remember, hey, I have this guy's number, let me call him. So he called the young man, he said, where are you? Why did you leave with my laptop? The young man said, how bad do you want it? How bad do you, what's the value of this laptop, right? He said sell it, but you didn't tell me how to do it. Now, I wouldn't encourage that. But the young man was thinking on his feet, and he had the confidence that, I'm going to do this. He didn't get the job, right? You can't take the laptop. But the whole point is really having the confidence in yourself, right? And if you lack the confidence, just say, you know what, I'm a little nervous, but it's okay. I'm here to have this conversation. The other person on the other side of the table, other side of the video, the other side of the phone, they're human, right? They're human. Just slow down, take your time.
Yeah, and confidence is one of those things that, it can take practice, and it's important to, if we're not prepared or we're not doing the research, we're going to be less confident in what we're saying, but we're the subject matter expert on ourselves, right? And so we need to work on the confidence we have when we're talking about ourselves. And, I always tell our student athletes, celebrate little wins. Oh, you got the interview. You know how many other people applied for that? Be proud and excited that you made it to that round, right? And so you should have a level of confidence going into it to know you made it that far, especially for extremely competitive roles, and leveraging that confidence, or that little boost of confidence into the next part of the process. So that's definitely something that's really important, is the confidence you bring to the interview as well. But like we said, that comes from practice. So
there was a question submitted that asked how to interview for a job that you've never done, but you know that you can do the work and you have the transferable skills. That's the key. Talk about the transferable skills. As Julie said, the whole industry has shifted since the pandemic, right? We are in this great resignation. People are leaving jobs because they realize those jobs that they were doing was not the things that they wanted to do, and they didn't find value in those things. But if you are interviewing for a job that you have never done before, well, that should have thought about that when you applied, right? Why did you apply, right? Why did you think that job would be the best job for you? Those transferable skills are so very, very, very important, right? And I'm sure that unless you are in healthcare, you're trying to be an engineer. I mean, there's totally different industries, right? But even then, I would think about something that I've done, any experience that I have had in my life, whether that's paid or unpaid or volunteer experience, how would that align to the job that I'm applying for? And I understand this, the purpose of the interview is not to qualify for the job. You have an interview because you qualified, right? So the recruiter saw something in your resume that said this person could be a great fit for the organization. So now it's your time to talk about, again, what's not on that resume, right? Are those transferable skills? That was a great question.
yeah, a lot of the time the transferable skills are those unteachables, right? You either have it or you don't. You're either a good problem solver or you're not. You can teach me how to use Salesforce or Java or C++. I can learn that, the training and things like that, but it's hard to really teach those unteachables, and those are the transferable skills that you should be talking about. And, they should be the pillars of your responses, and understanding how, the parallels between job A and job B. So how do you see it in a way that makes sense for who you're talking to, or the story you're telling to the interviewer? Yeah.
You
Want to jump to some more questions while we're on that, Maurice?
How would you handle the salary question? What do you think about that?
Yeah, salary is a good one. That's one we get all the time, obviously. I'm just big on just generally like, don't waste people's time anymore, right? It was before like salary was this big secret and you don't talk about it because you don't want people to think, oh, Maurice just applied to this job for the money, or that's all he's concerned about. And now it's more so we're busy. There's a lot of recruiters are dealing with a lot of candidates. Candidates are feeling out what jobs they want. Like be transparent with the salary. So we know, if I'm looking for $70,000 a year and this job is offering only maxed out as 50 and we're not going to meet and negotiate anywhere near what either of us want, why waste each other's time, right? Find a more suitable candidate for that salary range. But it's all about approach, right? It's not, how much money am I going to make or how much are you going to pay me? I'm really just curious, based on my experience level and my education level and what I can bring to this organization and this department. I'm curious about the salary range. And I want to make sure that that's in alignment for what I'm looking for, especially if you're going to pick up and move and cost of living differentials is something in play too. That's what you want to be, especially with the housing market now and things like that and inflation, lots of things. You want to be conscious of all of that stuff, but that goes back to research, what's using the salary.com and PayScale and Glassdoor, what on average should this position be making, or how much should I be paid? You want to have an idea too, so is that number coming in low? Is that number coming in high? But I think anymore, you shouldn't be afraid and ashamed of asking about salary earlier on in the process than in the past. Just the respect of people's time, right? Of this, interviews are long. Maurice was just saying, like, you can have 4 or 5 rounds of interviews. And if you wait until round 5 to talk salary, and it's been 5 to 7 hours of your time, aside from prep on both ends, and you're not going to meet in the middle for salary, you've just wasted both of your time, the organization's time, the recruiter's time, and obviously your time as a candidate. And it's disappointing too. But yeah, I think, having that salary conversation and talking about it, it's been taboo for a long time, but the switch has flipped. Talk about it. Because if there's not a match, then wish you best of luck in your search moving forward. I hope you find a candidate that, aligns better with the salary requirements or salary band that you have set up for that, and there's no ill will. Hope there's an opportunity to work with you in the future. And think of me for any position that might align better with where I'm at. So I think that that's more than appropriate, especially with how many processes and things are in play.
We have a few more minutes left. I hope this session is going well for everyone, and we're answering some of the broad questions that you may have. If anyone else has any other questions.
There's one in the chat. Is it recommended to try to get in touch with someone who works at the company to ask them a question in advance? Absolutely. I always say you think outside of the box and use all of the resources, which are people, right? They'll tell you things you can't Google. They might give you some inside advice on how to best prepare. They might know the hiring manager and they might be able to say, wow, like Maurice reached out to me before just to ask about my experience at the company, what I enjoy working there, or about working there, etc. But also making sure you're not biting off more than you can chew in the preparation phase. You don't want to feel overwhelmed with the research or the prep that you're doing. So making sure the kind of strategy you're setting for yourself is manageable and you're able to not just, you don't want to just focus on all the, oh my gosh, I talked to 12 people at the company, who said what, and you don't want to get any hangups there and take the time spent off of you in the prep for how to answer questions and invest too much in the previous. But it doesn't hurt, especially if you have like a 3rd degree connection that maybe works at the company and there's a little bit of not just like it's not a cold call or a cold reach out to this person. Maybe there's some level of connection. That never hurts. It never hurts to send the message. I always say, you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. So yeah, why not? It doesn't hurt for sure.
And if this process, that you're in and you have been in the industry or out of work for a number of years, you can still do it. Again, the industry, the world has shifted to where now people have been doing something for 20, 30 years in one place and they're leaving and they want to do what they've always wanted to do. Again, what you bring there, I think the age gap is shortened, right? And from my perspective, and again, you have tons and tons of experience, right, and transferable skills. And so, let that be a mantra for you. Let that be something you can stand on and say, this is what I bring. Even when you're shifting jobs in different companies, different industries, and those type of things. So, yeah, that was a question.
Yes, and just pulling up some more questions we have. During an interview, can you describe some things that really make a candidate stand out? I said it a little bit before. It's how that person makes me feel, that connectivity. I'm not hanging on every answer or word that person's saying. It's someone who, is making me feel excited about interviewing them, or like excited about the possibility of them joining the company and thinking, oh, wow, like if Maurice accepts this job, like I can only think about the projects we'll tackle together and how we're gonna, like, that feeling of excitement, but that comes from how that person makes me feel through their enthusiasm, their personality, them wanting to be there, and you can tell that they want it. I think that that's always exciting. But somebody who is, I said it earlier as well, authentic, somebody who's not feeding me a line just because I have to get this job or I need to impress the interviewer, someone who's feeling comfortable in their shoes and that they're really comfortable being themselves and they're letting that show through. We've both been doing this and interviewing people and talking about this for decades. And so it's always really refreshing when we're talking to somebody who is being their authentic self, because that's who we're also going to get at work. You've heard it before. Oh, we interviewed this person and we hired them and they're two different people, right? We've all heard that a lot. And so we don't want that. When that doesn't happen, that's a good thing, but that's because that person was their authentic self. But little attention to detail, research, somebody who you can just feel you're having a conversation with and not like it's an interrogation, I think is really great. But you just get the feeling, right? I'm a go with my gut type of girl. And when I'm interviewing somebody and I get that feeling of excitement, it's hard to explain. But yeah, that for me, they're kind of intangibles, but it's just a feeling. What about you, Mo?
I would agree with the same thing. I remember interviewing you, right? And I said, you know what? That's the person I want to work with. That's gonna be a great colleague because of the interest that, that you just feel this thing for the person that you're interviewing. And you know what? And you may not always get it right? You may not always get it right, but you do the best you can. That is it's costly to interview people. The interview process is very expensive, right? For a company. And you do the best you can do. It can be stressful for the person interviewing and the people being interviewed. The last thing I want to share, we got 5 minutes left, is the all-important follow-up. Thank you notes, thank you emails. If you can do a handwritten note, that still exists today, right? I don't know how many stories I've heard of people saying, you know what, I did not do my best on all of the different phases of the interview, but I did the follow-up letter and I got the job. Right. And remember,
the little things.
Remember something, like if I'm interviewing you all, whatever's behind me or something that I'm wearing, right, bring attention to that. I'll thank you for taking the time to interview me. I had an amazing time learning about the company. And I also love that Michigan basketball banner you had behind, my father or whatever. My father, I'm a huge basketball fan. Don't have to be Michigan. Just those little things that help people remember who you are. But that follow-up is so very, very important.
Yeah, the follow-up, like if you really felt not great about the interview and you're like, it's not sitting well with you, use the follow-up as a chance to say, hey, Maurice, I didn't really put my best foot forward today. I let my nerves get the best of me. But here, maybe here's why I deserve another shot. Or here's 3 things why you should bring me back for the next round or why you should hire me. Again, hit that nail right on the head. Don't swipe it under the rug. That's, again, something you used to do. You've had to be perfect and have this perfect presentation. Own it if you didn't feel great about it. Hey, I wasn't my best today, but this isn't a good indicator of how I perform. I'd love another shot, or I'd love to move to the next round because A, B, and C. Thanks for your consideration and whatever. So could also be an opportunity to do that. The handwritten note has gotten people jobs with us before. Like we don't really get mail anymore. So when you get a hand, and obviously that takes a little bit longer, right? So we always suggest, you know, the LinkedIn connection, because if I don't get the job, I still want Maurice in my network for the next job. And I want him to see, okay, Julie wasn't a fit now, but now that we're connected on LinkedIn, he's able to see all the things that I'll be continuing to do. And maybe if there's another opening, maybe now he's going to think of me and say, hey, Julie, we're posting this job. I've seen you do all this great work and this and that. I want you to apply, right? So they're able to see what's going on, and your network is continuing to grow, especially if it's an industry that you're looking to pivot or transition into. Those are different things.
Again, we hope this was helpful. Again, this was a 35,000 foot view. We kind of dove in a little bit on some things. We hope this is helpful for everyone that's attending or is watching, that's going to see this. I mean, it's definitely been something, you know, an interviewing process, you know, things have changed over time, but the interview is just only shifted a little bit because you're still telling your story. Again, thank you for taking the time to joining us.
One last question someone just threw, and I'm going to answer it real fast. How can they notice you if they have 500 plus connections? That's a good question. Your activity in posting. Are you liking things that they're posting? Are you commenting? LinkedIn does a great job of giving you, obviously, the analytics of who's viewing your profile, but your activity and your posting, your updates and sharing projects you've been a part of, papers you've written, involvement in the community, the more frequently you're posting and active with LinkedIn, not only commenting and liking what other people are posting, but creating your own organic content, you're going to be coming up in the top of feeds of people who have thousands and thousands of connections.
There's a question, if I'm re-entering the job world after long term, due to travels and elderly care, do I have some extra questions? Not necessarily, because they should just ask questions about what the job. But if they're asking, you know, what were you doing in this time, in this period, you know, talk about it. You know, I had, without being too personal, I had to take care of an elderly parent. We all have parents, right? Mm-hmm. And while I was traveling, not just through the world, but I was exploring, I was developing, doing some personal development, right? I was reading, I was researching, and that caused me to travel, right? Create a story behind all of that.
Yeah, and LinkedIn is a great way to tell that story because you can do it from the first person. And so you're able to put more detail and explanation. Whereas on like maybe your resume, it's more filling, if you want to or looking to fill a gap, you're doing so and putting some content there. But LinkedIn would be a better place and spot to elaborate on this story. And don't be afraid of the curves that life have thrown at us, because like Maurice said, we've all had something. And so let's normalize it. Let's talk about it instead of getting nervous that you're feeling inadequate. Stepping up and pivoting your life and taking care of someone who's important to you, that's big. That's big time. That's somebody who I want to hire, you know, someone who's going to make a tough decision. Not everybody would do that.
Last thing is, you can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it. Have the confidence, you can do it. The world is yours, you can do it.
Yeah, if you don't put your name in the hat, you're never going to get the job, right? So same thing with the interview, make sure you're doing the prep and position yourself for success.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Maurice and Julie. Really appreciate it. I took several notes as well. Certainly the fail to plan to fail mantra, and investing in the process and making sure you're well prepared. The confidence and belief is huge as well, and telling your story. And for me, I love the framing for the how introduce yourself response, and thinking of it as the back of your book as well. Really love that, to keep that in mind moving forward. So to all of our attendees, we really appreciate you joining us today and sharing any questions in advance, as well as some of the questions that came in this afternoon. If this topic is of interest to you, and you can definitely check out a whole video from Maurice within our Career Kickoff collection on Michigan Online on interviewing, so feel free to check that out. But if it's of interest of you, feel free to please join us on Michigan Online, visit online.umich.edu/learn-for-your-future to learn a little bit more. And with that, we very much thank you once again for attending, and takes us to the end of this event. So best of luck moving forward, and we look to see you next time.